Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the March for Life, our Education and Defense Fund, our 501c4, and our Board of Directors, I would like to officially welcome you and kick off the 2018 March for Life. Welcome. My name is Jeannie Mancini, and I have the honor of being the president of the March for Life. This is going to be the 6th March that I've been involved in the coordination behind the scenes, and it's such an honor to have you all here this morning. As we head into the next few days, I know the single thing that I'm most excited about, and there are certainly a lot of things to be excited about, is our theme this year, which is Love Saves Lives. Love saves lives. Yes, thank you. Love is the foundation of the pro-life movement. Love is the DNA of the pro-life movement. And in choosing our theme this year, we were very, we were very much thinking about two things in particular. One, that love and sacrifice go hand in hand, and that sacrifice begets fruit, and that all of us are called to live in sacrificial, loving ways to build a culture of life, whether it is a woman in a very difficult situation who's facing an unexpected pregnancy, or whether it's, our Mary Lemke, who's, giving every last bit of what she's got to make this thing run here today. So all of us are called in our own unique ways to live very fully sacrificial lives. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, to anyone who's sitting here this morning and to our Facebook Live viewers today. But so that is the first thing. The second thing is that the pregnancy care center movement and maternity home movement is the backbone of what we are about when it means to be pro-life. These pregnancy care centers and maternity homes have been working for years, for decades, to help women who are facing unexpected pregnancies and families. They provide well over $100 million in free resources a year to women who are facing unexpected pregnancies, and it's truly remarkable. So today, during our conference and expo, we have the opportunity to drill down on that theme just a little bit more. And we have an amazing lineup, as you know, and I'll introduce our lineup here in just a moment. Let me also say welcome to our Facebook Live viewers and to everyone here physically in the audience, or if you're viewing on Facebook Live. I just want to remind you to use social media throughout these next few days. It's something that's very important to the movement, our young movement. And we specifically ask that you use the hashtag #WhyWeMarch. Why we march. And the reason that we ask you to use that hashtag is because we want you to tell your stories. Why do you march? Because every single one of you sitting out there has a story. We all have stories about why we believe in the inherent dignity of the human person from conception to death. And we want to hear why you march. Frankly, America and the whole world need to hear why you march. So please use the hashtag #WhyWeMarch and share your stories, because that is absolutely, without a doubt, the most convicting thing. So just a quick overview of our fun morning here together. We're going to start with our keynote, Stephanie Gray, who I know so many of you are here to listen to. We're then going to go into a panel led by Catherine Jean Lopez, who of course is a senior fellow at the National Review Institute and editor-at-large of National Review Online, and a nationally syndicated columnist who's been published by a wide variety of publications. We then close the conference by giving tools to the marchers, to us, to all of us participants, to really effectively engage with our members of Congress. Going back to the very first march, of course, this is our 45th annual March for Life, which is kind of amazing in a lot of ways. It's actually really sad when you think about it, that here we are, we're still marching 45 years later. We've lost 60 million Americans to abortion in 40 years, and yet we've become the largest annual human rights demonstration. But that's not our goal, right? Our goal is to work ourselves out of a job. Hopefully we can collectively agree that we don't need to come back here for 45 more years. That's really our goal, but we all need to join together to be able to do that. Okay, so Early on in the days of the March for Life, when it was a little bit easier to bring flowers into Congress, we would have marchers deliver a rose. Many of you might remember this. They would actually deliver a rose to their members of Congress after they went to the March for Life. And this was their way of engaging with them. The rose, of course, was symbolic of two things. One of the loss of life with an abortion, and also of the beautiful gift of life. Of course, the rose is our symbol, it's our logo, and so we do this last part of our conference this morning to really give you symbolically the rose, to be able to go to your members of Congress, to be able to engage with them, and most effectively convince them to build a culture of life through policy. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Stephanie to you and hand the mic over to her, but I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful morning. Again, we're so grateful for you all being here and so excited about what we've got in store for the next few days. So, how many of you have listened to Stephanie's Google headquarters talk? Many of you. Okay. If you have not listened to this, I absolutely encourage you to go and put aside about an hour and listen to this, because it's potentially the very best thing that you'll ever hear about in terms of engaging graciously and intellectually on our issues. So many of our staff listened to Stephanie's wonderful Google headquarters talk over the summer, and we just decided emphatically that we would love to have her speak as our keynote speaker at the conference and expo this morning. So Stephanie is a seasoned and international speaker, as you'll see. She's given over 800 pro-life presentations across North America, the UK, Ireland, Austria, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and of course, I mentioned her talk at Google. I will also mention, maybe this isn't the nicest thing, but I'm going to say it. Within 8 hours, her views surpassed that of the head of Planned Parenthood, who'd given a talk within a month before. So, and it's gone quite viral. Stephanie's debated abortion advocates such as physicians who do abortions and a whole plethora of people that would be very hard to debate. She's done hundreds of media interviews, and she also was the executive director and co-founder of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, a wonderful Canada pro-life group. I mean, just phenomenal group. Stephanie is faculty at Blackstone Legal Fellowship, where she teaches law students from around the world about conversing persuasively on these issues. She's author of Love Unleashes Life, very similar to our theme, Abortion and the Art of Communicating Truth, as well as a physician's guide to discussing abortion. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from UBC in Vancouver and a certification with distinction in healthcare ethics from the NCBC in Philadelphia. She's also going to be doing a book signing after the conference right outside of the ballroom here. So if you'd like to purchase her book and get it signed, you can do so. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here. Well, I'm going to reveal my age as I tell you the following story. My 20-year high school reunion is coming up. I know, I can't believe it, right? I really don't look that old, right? Right? Anyways, my 20-year high school reunion is coming up this year. And although it has been 2 decades since I have been in high school, I can distinctly recall a story that one of my high school teachers told my class. And it was a story about when he had been our age, when he was a teenager. And he told my class that there was a student that had been in his class who was deemed to be an outcast. And he was bullied day in and day out. And he told us that one day in particular, a group of bullies surrounded this particular kid in the hallway. And they dragged him out of the school's building. And they dragged him towards the school's field, where there was a flagpole. They then stripped that kid naked. They put him into a net that they had previously laid out. They wrapped the net around him, and they attached it to the flagpole. And those bullies began to hoist that boy up the flagpole. As all of that was happening, a student saw it and was outraged. So he ran and tried to stop the bullies from doing what they were doing. But they overpowered the second student and began to do to him what they had done to the first student. And as all of that was happening, A crowd of students gathered on the field, simply watching. Within that crowd, then as a student, was my teacher. As he told my class that story, he said to us, looking back, if I could return to that moment, if I could take the place of anyone there that day, who do you think I wish I would have been? And then he answered his own question by saying, the student who stood up in defense of the victimized boy. And as I have thought often over the years about that very powerful story, what has struck me is that when I think of the injustice he spoke about, or any injustice, we really have one of four roles to play. There's the role of the victim, the role of the persecutor, the role of the bystander, or the role of the defender. Now, we may not have a choice about that first role and whether we fit into it, that of victim. But we certainly do have a choice about which of the other three roles we will decide to take on. Now, we're gathered here today, we're gathered this week, because we have taken on the role of being defenders of preborn children, of being their hands, their feet, their voices, knowing they are entirely incapable of defending themselves. But what makes our defense of them different from that one student's attempt to defend the child who was being bullied is that we cannot just run up and separate the victim from the persecutor. We cannot try to remove the child from the environment of danger because the child needs her mother's womb. And so if the mother is considering endangering the child and enlisting other people who would endanger the child, because we can't separate the child, we need to use our powers of persuasion. We need to use our powers of persuasion to try to move the hearts and minds of that woman and anyone else in that moment of crisis so that abortion is unthinkable. So that it doesn't even enter into the mind of anyone to consider harming the child. So how do we be good defenders? How do we use our powers of persuasion so as to actually save lives? I want to answer that question today. I want to equip you to better defend the lives of preborn children. And in particular, there are three things that I want to focus on. The first is I want us to think about what abortion supporters think about. For us to reflect on the mindset that drives abortion so that we can understand what we're up against. The second thing I want to do is then talk about how we can reach the mind so as to win the argument. And finally, I'm going to talk about how we can reach the heart so as to win the person. In terms of understanding what we're up against, one of my favorite questions to ask people when it comes to dialoguing about abortion is a very open-ended question of, what do you think about abortion? And when I have asked many people that question, the vast majority, unfortunately, respond, I'm pro-choice, or I think it's necessary. So then I'll always follow that up with, why? Why are you pro-choice? Why do you think it's necessary? And inevitably, what I get back is an abortion supporter focusing on the difficult circumstances a woman in crisis finds herself in. They'll say, well, we need abortion if a woman's been raped. We need abortion if a woman is poor. We need abortion if there's health problems for her or her child. We need abortion if she's young, if she has no support, if she's trying to finish her education. And when I get that kind of message communicated to me, what I do is I listen for what hasn't been verbalized. I listen for what hasn't been verbalized. And what I've started to pick up is when someone says, we need abortion, I support abortion, I'm pro-choice because of rape, poverty, the age of the mom, and so forth, what they're actually communicating but not articulating is to be pregnant and in these circumstances would be hard. To be pregnant and poor is hard. To be pregnant and young and have no support is hard.
To be pregnant from sexual assault is excruciatingly difficult. And so the first thing I encourage us always to do when we can start to hear what hasn't been spoken is to validate that which can be validated. And to say, I agree with you. To be pregnant and poor would be hard. Notice they didn't say that, but they communicated that by saying we need abortion for reasons of poverty. So we start with the affirmation, I agree, to be pregnant and poor would be hard. To be pregnant and young would be hard. And then we simply ask a question. Imagine someone is pregnant and not poor, but when their child is born, they hit difficult times financially and suddenly find themselves parenting an infant and being poor. Would it be okay for anyone to kill the born child for reasons of poverty? And they're going to say, well, no, of course not. So then we ask the question back, why then may we kill the preborn child for reasons of poverty? And they'll say, well, that's different. A fetus isn't a person, an infant is. And the moment we draw that answer out of them, what it shows is they do not consider the preborn child to be equal to the born, but rather they consider the preborn child inferior. And it's our job, upon identifying that, to be able to show them the preborn child is actually the equal to you or me. And if poverty is not a reason to kill you or me or an infant, poverty is not a reason to kill the preborn child. In every circumstance we're given, we can make that simple analogy to a born child in order to demonstrate we don't kill the born to deal with difficult circumstances of the parents. So why kill the preborn to deal with difficult circumstances of the parents? As we all very likely heard not too long ago, the headline news story, Iceland has eliminated Down syndrome. Of course, that was really misrepresenting the reality. It's not they found some type of cure for this genetic anomaly, but in reality, they killed people with Down syndrome before they were born. And so when it comes to a poor prenatal diagnosis, people will readily say, well, if the child is going to have, some sort of disability, abortion is needed. And we need to simply acknowledge, sure, a disability is a challenge. There is suffering and there is difficulty. Consider a born person who has Down syndrome or some other disability. May we kill them? And when they say no, we ask then, why may we kill the preborn child? And they may say, well, the person who, is born and has a disability is human, but the fetus isn't. So once again, that's the question we need to discern. Is the fetus human like the born person? How do we respond to situations that are difficult? Is it possible to change our perspective and see a challenging situation in a different way so as to come up with a different solution? When it comes to the topic of poor prenatal diagnosis in particular, I think it's so important that we help the people we're dialoguing with see things with a different pair of glasses, to have a positive perspective rather than the negative perspective we're all too often given. And so I want to play for you a short video clip about someone who's helping change people's perspective when it comes to physical and genetic difference. Let's take a look.
Rick Woodaddy's life has been all about beauty and the power of images. He spent years as a fashion photographer in Milan, Paris, and with a studio in New York, always shooting what fashion editors decreed to be beauty. Then, 15 years ago, when he considered photographing a woman with a disability, he was shocked at images in medical textbooks he consulted. Where, he asked, is the humanity?
It doesn't work like this. That doesn't help. This doesn't help. This is sad.
I haven't looked at this book in 25
It's terrifying.
years.
There's other ways to present this. I've spoken to so many genetic counselors that have a family in front of them, and they say, okay, this is what your daughter's going to have. Read this. And they cover up the photograph so because it'll freak the family right out. And there's got to be something else that we can do. There's got to be another way to present that information to that family. So this is Kiara. Now,
Those medical pictures changed his life. Ever since then, he has devoted his talent to the disabled. People like Kiara. She has albinism, a congenital disorder that not only affects pigmentation, but vision.
This is stunning.
Oh, it's a great photograph. Yeah, I love the photograph. But they told her, no, don't be a dancer. You don't have enough vision to follow the choreography. You'll never dance in chorus. Find another dream. She said no. She's New Zealand's Celtic dance champion.
His pictures are nothing short of stunning and are being exhibited in public places around the world. aimed at changing how we see people who appear different. But he started with albinism.
Who was your first person you photographed and you thought, oh, I see something different?
Yeah. Well, it was Christine. Christine walked into the studio, and she's beautiful. She has long white hair, pale skin. But she walks in like that. No eye contact, no one-word answers. This kid was teased every single day in her life. And it was like holding up a mirror and saying, look at yourself, you're magnificent. And she saw it, and she just exploded. That's her. I mean, she's so beautiful. And she changed right in front of the lens.
She was nothing like the pictures of albinism he had found in medical textbooks.
These are the images that I saw, but I also not only saw those images, I saw like freak circus albino families, and I was like, oh, this is horrible. And then of course all the movie references.
Always his freaks.
Usually the bad guy, usually the villain, the evil albino.
He approached other women who had been born with albinism, people like Margaret Breed.
I definitely hadn't seen myself like that before. When he approached me and said, I want to photograph you, you're beautiful, definitely hadn't been in my vocabulary for thinking about myself.
I started photographing these kids and hearing their stories and these adults. So I called Life magazine and said, hey, I've got this great story.
6 weeks later, it was a major spread in Life magazine.
Well, then someone said, it's not just about people with albinism, it's about celebrating all difference. Would you come and photograph our families at our chromosome 18 conference? It was in San Antonio. And I'm thinking, what the hell is a chromosome 18 anomaly? I had no idea.
Chromosome 18 anomaly is a genetic defect that can produce a whole range of severe malformations.
Were you shocked?
It was like I got slapped in the head, punched in the stomach. It ended. I thought, what happens if we're having a baby? And we find out that this baby is born with a chromosome 18, and that's what you see.
Can you make beauty out of a trisomy 18?
Well, look, there's gorgeousness there. That's gorgeous kid. That's Pauline. That's Rebecca. These kids are superb. Ellington. These are all from the chromosome 18. Remy. She's stunning. She's amazing.
Rick is the subject of a film to be released later this year. Award-winning documentarian Joanna Rudnick followed him to a conference of families whose children have chromosome 18 anomalies.
Rick took pictures of him the way I saw him. Not the way everybody else saw him, but the way I saw him. And it was the first time I had somebody tell me how beautiful he was. He didn't tell me he was small. He didn't tell me he had fat cheeks from his steroids. And they were these most beautiful pictures of this blue-eyed little baby.
Have you seen the positive exposure presentation yet?
Yes, we have.
So last year,
Yes,
right?
last year we saw it.
Guidati's hope lies in young medical students. He's a regular on campuses around the country.
I really want to hear your opinion on that. The idea is to put the humanity, make sure that humanity is in medicine, to make sure that we see not a disease, a diagnosis, but a human being. I know we all know that there's a lot of science in medicine, but I can assure you there's a lot of art in medicine as well. That is so important. It's not what you're treating, it's who you're treating.
It's not what you're treating, it's who you're treating. And that's really at the heart of the message we want to communicate to the culture, that the preborn child is a who, is someone, is equal to us. So whatever difficult circumstances we hear from abortion supporters, it's our job to validate the challenge and then cast another vision, that we're dealing with a human and that life can be beautiful, as Rick has demonstrated for us. That leads me to the second thing I wanted to reflect on this morning for how we can better defend preborn children. Once we begin that dialogue and we get people to the point of questioning, is the preborn child a who? Are they human like you or me? We then need to be equipped to be able to reach the minds of others so as to win the argument. What can we do to succeed at that? Well, one thing I like to do, again, an open-ended question, is to ask the person I'm dialoguing with, do you believe in human rights? And inevitably, I always get back the answer, yes, of course. So then, if you can use your smartphone, I have PowerPoint today, you can use your smartphone, draw up a picture of an embryo just after fertilization, just after sperm egg fusion, point to it and say, okay, if you believe in human rights, what about this human's rights? Now, when they look at that picture, what are they going to say? That's not a human. So then you ask a question. What are her parents? Is the pregnant woman human? Is her partner human? If yes, wouldn't it follow that this embryo must be human as well? Because two human parents can't produce a cat, right? It can't happen. So if we want to know what something is, we simply ask, what are that something's parents? Now, at that point, the individual might say, well, even if technically the entity is human because the parents are human, that entity isn't alive. So then I ask another question. Is the embryo growing? Is the one cell growing into two? Are those two growing into four? Those 4 into 8 and 16 and so forth? And if yes, wouldn't it follow by the embryo's growth that the embryo is living? And if the parents are human, wouldn't it follow by that that the embryo is human? And if we believe in human rights, then what we now know to be a living human, shouldn't that individual have the same human rights as you or me? At that point, the individual may say, well, it's just a fetus. And so the question I like to ask back is this: what kind of fetus? And the individual might be confused. They say, well, what do you mean, what kind of fetus? So then, again, use your smartphone, find an image online of this. What is it? It's a dolphin what? It's a dolphin fetus. So I like to use this to demonstrate the word fetus is not species specific. The word fetus doesn't tell us what you are. The word fetus tells us how old you are. Dolphins have fetuses, dogs have fetuses, and humans have fetuses. So I take the word, and then I ask the abortion supporter, in the context of a human, two human parents who are pregnant with a fetus, when the fetus is born, what do we call the fetus? And they'll say, well, a baby. And I say, okay, and when the baby turns 2, what will we call the baby? And they'll say, well, a toddler. And I say, okay, and when the toddler turns 13, what do we call the toddler? They say teenager. And when the teenager turns 21, what do we call the teenager? They say an adult. And so I draw that out of them in order to show that they understand the words adult, teenager, toddler, or baby are like the words fetus or embryo. They tell us how old something is, not what something is. If we want to know what something is, we simply ask, what are the parents? Now, abortion supporters sometimes still have a hard time wrapping their minds around the idea that something so small that looks so different from you or me could be equal to us as opposed to being inferior. So how do we convey that that individual is equal to us in value and worth? Well, besides asking questions, which I've done a lot of so far in this presentation, I also like to tell stories. And there's a particular story that I like to tell to help people see that that underdeveloped preborn child is equal to you or me. And the story I like to tell involves drawing on an old technology that is making a comeback, and that is Polaroid cameras. So with Polaroid cameras, as we all know, you have the stack of white cards, you put them in the camera, you snap a photo, and then the card comes out right away, which is great because, who prints their photos these days, right? So it's actually really handy to have a Polaroid camera. So you get the printout right away, but as we all know, you actually don't see the image that you had seen before you right away. What do you see initially when the card comes out of the camera? Kind of black smudges, and then what do? You shake it, right? You wait a few moments. So what I say to the abortion supporter, when I understand that they understand how Polaroid cameras work, I then say, I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine that you go on vacation and you decide to document your vacation using a Polaroid camera. And let's imagine you go to where my dad is from. In fact, I spoke there a few months ago, and there are 2 tables of people today who represent this particular place. That's a great place to travel to. Right, okay, it's Scotland. Right there, we've got some fantastic Scottish accents. Okay, right, it's great. Right, but the guy who stood up is Irish. He's actually Irish, so that's a different accent. Okay, right, so imagine you go on vacation, you go to Scotland, and while you're in Scotland, you go to a very, very famous place in Scotland. Okay, right, it's called Loch Ness. Now, who can tell me what's in Loch Ness? The monster. My grandma, she couldn't see very well, but she swore when she visited Scotland, my mom's mom, not my dad's mom, when she visited Scotland, that she saw out in the distance the Loch Ness Monster. Well, we don't really believe her, but let's imagine that you go to Scotland and you go to Loch Ness and you take photos of all the scenery that is there to behold. And let's imagine that a short while into your boat tour, you suddenly see the Loch Ness Monster. But unlike my grandma who wasn't able to prove it, you have your Polaroid camera. And so you snap a photo of the Loch Ness Monster, of all the humps and bumps that are sticking out of the water. And just as the little card comes out, Nessie goes underwater. Now you're not upset she's disappeared because you're holding in your hand proof, photographic evidence that she does exist. And you know that this isn't just something for your photo album. This is worth money. You're going to sell this to newspapers and magazines to be able to prove that the Loch Ness Monster is real and to profit from it. So you're really excited about this, paying off your vacation with one Polaroid photo. And so let's imagine you start shaking the card, and you're on a boat tour with people from all over the world, some of whom have never seen a Polaroid camera before. So one of the tourists excitedly grabs the card from you to have a look at the picture you took. But in their mind, they're not looking at the Loch Ness Monster. In their mind, they're looking at black smudges. And they think the photo didn't properly take. So with great disappointment, they rip it and toss it in the lake. Would you be upset? Okay, right, see, we Scottish people are right. My dad, I mentioned, right, he's Scottish, so I'm a wee bit Scottish. We've got a temper. Okay, right, a wee bit of Braveheart in all of us. Right, so imagine the Scottish temper comes out, and you get really angry at that person for destroying the photo, and they look at you like you're crazy. And they say, yeah, it was just black smudges. Why do you care so much about black smudges? And you'd likely reply, it wasn't just black smudges. Everything about the image of the Loch Ness Monster was captured in an instant. It just needed time to develop. And so the same can be said about each one of us. We were captured in that instant of sperm-egg fusion, that instant of fertilization. We just needed time to develop. When dialoguing with abortion supporters, reaching their minds, working to win the argument, we need to be prepared for another response we're going to get. And that is, even if they acknowledge the validity of all we've already communicated, they may say, even if the embryo is a living human, the embryo isn't a person. So then we simply ask another question. What is a person? How do you define person? And inevitably, they're going to come up with criteria, some sort of definition, that involves referring to what the child looks like or is incapable of doing. So they might say, well, the embryo is not a person because the embryo is smaller than all of us. The embryo is not a person because the embryo is less developed intellectually and physically. The embryo can't think or reason or feel pain at fertilization. The embryo is not a person because the embryo is in the mother's body. Or the embryo is not a person because the embryo is dependent on the mother's body. But if we think about the criteria that they may have come up with, that criteria could exclude born humans from personhood as well. A newborn child is smaller than you or me, but we don't say the newborn child is not a person. A 2-year-old is less developed physically and intellectually from you or me. A 2-year-old cannot think or reason like you or I can. A 2-year-old, if that 2-year-old has congenital insensitivity to pain, a condition that is rare but exists, would not be able to feel pain like the embryo cannot feel pain. Would we say that that child is not a person because of the inability to feel pain or the lower level of intellectual development? No, we would never deprive personhood status of that born child, so we shouldn't deprive personhood status to the preborn child. As for the child being in the mom's body, since when does our personhood be defined by where we are instead of what we are? Whether we're in this room or in the hallway or outdoors or in another place, we remain the same even when our environment changes. And yes, the preborn child is dependent on the mother's body. Aren't born children dependent on their parents as well? Even if not for breastfeeding, Parents have to use their bodies, guardians use their bodies in some way to care for infants, using their arms, using their chest to lean the child up, to burp the child, to feed the child, to change the child. We inevitably are using our bodies to care for the other, and we don't deprive born humans of their personhood status just because they are dependent on others to care for them. Neither should we deprive preborn children of their personhood status just because they are dependent on others to care for them. The other argument we might hear is one that a philosophy professor once brought up during a debate that I did. He said, even if the embryo's a human, even if the embryo's a person, I can justify abortion, he said. Because human persons, like all of us in the room, don't have a right to use another human person's body without their consent. He said, imagine I have a child, and imagine I love my child, and imagine my child is dying from kidney disease. And so my child needs a kidney transplant. And imagine I, as the parent, am the only person with the right body type who could give a kidney and it actually saved my child's life. He said, would it be nice of me to donate one of my kidneys to my child? Yes. Would it kill me to donate one of my kidneys to my child? No, he said. But should the law force me as a parent to give one of my kidneys to my children or to my child? No, he said, the law should not. And just as the law should not force me to give one of my kidneys to my child, the law should not force a pregnant woman to give her uterus to her child, even if that child is a human person. What do we say? Well, in my situation, I wasn't exactly sure what to say. As a person of faith, I began to pray. And so I was taking notes as he was doing his speech, and I was praying, and I was asking for divine inspiration, and I sensed God communicate to me. Not orally, but he did say to me through the senses, Stephanie, I created the uterus for a different purpose. And I began to think about that over and over as I was reflecting, as the professor was talking, and I got up and I said, Dr. Sneddon has made a very compelling argument, until we ask ourselves a question. And the question we have to ask ourselves is this: what is the nature and purpose of the kidney versus the nature and purpose of the uterus? Because when we answer that question, we begin to understand why a parent is not obligated to give their child their kidney, but should be obligated to give their child their uterus. I said the kidney exists in my body, for my body. But I said the uterus is different from all my other body parts in that it exists in my body every single month, getting ready for someone else's body. My uterus exists more for my offspring than it exists for me. I can live without my uterus, but my offspring cannot. And they can claim a right to the organ which was made more for them than me, than we can claim to the organ of any other organ in anyone else's body. Parents have a responsibility to meet the basic needs of their children: food, clothing, and shelter. And the environment of the uterus and maintaining a pregnancy is analogous to providing the food, clothing, and shelter to a born child, but in that context, we're giving it to a preborn child. Much more can be said about the specific arguments that are often raised, but I wanted to highlight those particular ones to show that we can make an intellectual case and we truly can win the argument. The final point I wanted to address today is how we can win the person we're arguing with. How we can reach the heart as well as the mind. A few years ago, I was on a college campus, and during Q&A, a student got up to the microphone, and she said, "What about rape? Are you telling me if someone has been forced to have sex against their will and they get pregnant, that they have to go through 9 months of pregnancy with a rapist child?" And when I'm asked that question, my common response is to acknowledge the injustice that has gone on, and then to ask a question: is it fair to give the death penalty to the innocent child? When I've asked that question of some, they have paused and said, I never thought of it that way. This girl wasn't satisfied. Yeah, but, she said, and came back with more of a response. So I thought, well, I'll give a more detailed answer. So I said, okay, well, imagine this. I said, imagine a woman has consensual sex with her husband on Monday, and on Tuesday, when she's walking home from work late at night, she is raped by a stranger. So that in 1 month's time, when she finds out she's pregnant, she won't know whether the father of her child is her husband or the rapist. So let's say she hopes it's her husband's child, carries on with the pregnancy, and after birth they do a paternity test. And the test results come back and show the child's father is not her husband, it's the rapist. I asked the question, may we kill the born child because of the father's crime? If not, why then may we kill the preborn child because of the father's crime? She said, yeah, but you made that up. That would never happen. So then I said, okay, well, let me tell you something else. I said, there was a New York Times article many years ago interviewing an abortionist by the name of Dr. Wickland. And in this article, it said Dr. Wickland described her horror. Dr. Wickland described her horror when she aborted the pregnancy of a woman who had been raped, only to discover after examining the removed tissue that the pregnancy was further along than she or the woman had thought. And she just realized she had aborted an embryo the woman and her husband had conceived together. Even the abortionist was horrified. But if it's horrifying to kill a child conceived in love, isn't it also horrifying to kill a child conceived in violence? Because in both situations, we're dealing with a child. And this girl said, yeah, but, and nothing was getting through to her. I thought, I'm being nice. I've got good questions. I've got good analogies. Like, why aren't I getting through to her? And I saw this long lineup behind her, and I finally had to say, I would be happy to engage you further, but out of respect for the other people's questions, I'm going to have to give them a chance to speak. But I welcome you to speak to me one-on-one at the end of the presentation. She respected that, sat down, I took the other questions, and as soon as the talk was over, boom, she wanted to talk to me, and she was up at the podium. And so she and I carried on the conversation. I noticed that she was focused like a laser beam on that one circumstance. And I started to wonder if possibly I was speaking to a victim of sexual assault. And possibly the problem wasn't here. The problem was here. And that my initial approach had been here, but if I have the wrong problem, I'm going to come up with the wrong solution. Starting to wonder if the problem was here, I then said to her at one point, you know, I have a friend who was molested as a child. I said, I'm one of about 5 people who know this. She's never even told her parents. And I said that being one of the few people who know this, I have journeyed with her to healing. I went to counseling with her. And I said, I'll be upfront and honest with you, she never got pregnant. But I tell you this because in journeying with her to get help, what became clear to me is whether someone gets pregnant or not, if they have been sexually assaulted, they have been traumatized, and an abortion is not going to take that trauma away. And she looked at me with a deep sadness in her eyes and said, yeah, 10 years and counting. And then I just looked at her. I said, I am so sorry for your suffering. And in that moment, the direction of our conversation changed. I was focused on her safety. I asked if the person who hurt her was still in her life. As we went back and forth, I asked if she felt she'd received enough counseling that was helpful, or if I could help connect her to a place locally. And I saw her open up. I saw a bridge be built between the two of us. And I was reminded of something my friends over at Justice for All have said. When someone asks about rape, they're not asking if the baby is human. They're asking if the pro-lifer is human. Do we care and convey that care for the person in front of us as much as we rightly care for and convey that care for the child in the womb? There's a book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion that has us imagine 3 buckets of water in front of us. Imagine on my left is a cold bucket of water. In the middle is lukewarm, and in the right is hot water. So imagine I put my right hand in the hot water, and I put my left hand in the cold water. After a minute, I take them both out and put them in the middle. When I take the hand out of the cold water and put it in the new bucket, I'm going to think the new bucket of water is what? Hot. The hand which came from the hot water, when it goes into the new bucket, is going to think the new temperature is cold. Both of them are actually wrong. It's lukewarm. But the previous experience is coloring the present interpretation. The previous experience is coloring the present interpretation. It is so important when we engage people in conversation that we not win the argument but lose them. If we lose them, we lose the argument. And so as we engage people in conversation, we want to have a wisdom and a sensitivity to know when we need to move from the head to the heart and to step back and ask ourselves, what temperature was the bucket of water they were in before I met them? Where are they coming from? So what types of questions can we ask people that will result in that type of opening up, an opportunity to encounter them and listen to where they're coming from? I remember once dealing with a very hostile abortion supporter who was yelling and swearing, not really giving me much of a chance to say anything. And so at one point I just looked at him and I said, Noah, what does someone who thinks like you want someone who thinks like me to understand? Who knows what the person will say? But it can result in a profound ministering opportunity. On another occasion, I dealt with a very angry man. And as we were going back and forth in dialogue, he then revealed his sister had had an abortion. And I started to wonder if perhaps he was hostile because he was defending his sister, and also thought by my position against abortion I could somehow be judging her or hating her. Not wanting to assume that, but wanting to deal with what I thought was the real issue, I asked a question not of the head but of the heart. And after he ranted for a bit and swore at me, I let things pause for a moment, and then I said, what do you think I think about your sister? I thought he'd go yelling again, but that one question softened his heart. And he said, you seem like a reasonable person. You probably wouldn't hate her. And that gave me an opportunity to affirm, you're right, I don't hate her. To then talk about my friends who are post-abortive, to be able to speak a message of healing for his sister through the experience of my friends, knowing he wasn't ready to acknowledge that what she had done was wrong. But I could talk about my friends who did acknowledge what they did was wrong, and how they've found healing, and how they've been redeemed, and how they've been transformed in order to leave a message of hope in his life. On another occasion, I talked to a young man who was focused on control and how wrong it was to control a woman, how wrong it was to dominate. And I came back with my usual academic, intellectual responses. Nothing was getting through to him until at one point when the topic of rape came up, he told me that he'd been molested as a child. And everything else previous in the conversation made sense. I thought, that's why he's obsessed with control and domination. That is why he doesn't want to control or dominate anyone, because he has been a victim of control, a victim of domination. And I thought in that moment, I have presented the pro-life argument. What I need to do now is just be present to him and talk to him about his life and hear his story and let him see that I care for him as much as I care for the preborn child. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, whom you would change, you must first love. And they must know that you love them. And so I'd like to wrap things up, ending where I began, thinking about the injustice that my high school teacher had told my class about, that student being victimized, and the other student who ran to defend him. And I want us to think about how that's our job, but to apply it to the specific case we're in and use our powers of persuasion to not just reach the head, but to also reach the heart. And so I want to tell you 2 stories of people who have applied this, reaching the head and reaching the heart in order to save lives. This is my friend Kiana. She's a nursing student. And she's a very powerful story because Kiana, several years ago, was participating in a pro-life exhibit. And she was very peacefully standing on the sidewalk, handing out literature and exposing the injustice of abortion. Much can be said about abortion victim photography, which time does not permit this presentation to do. What I'll simply say is that the imagery, abortion victim imagery is like any tool. It can be used well, and it can be used very poorly. Like any tool, the more powerful it is, the more skilled the user needs to be. And Kiana is an example of someone who knew how to use this very powerful tool well and in a very skilled way. And as she was standing with the images, a young man and his girlfriend walked past, and she overheard the man say to the girl, "That's going to happen to our baby Thursday." And Kiana felt the Holy Spirit convict her as they walked past to walk towards them. So she handed her sign to a team member and just walked to this couple and said, "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear what you said. Is there anything I can do? Would you reconsider the abortion you have scheduled?" And so they began to talk to Kiana. And the woman said to her, "What you showed was very effective, but I'm homeless and I'm a drug addict and I can't have this baby." And Kiana, knowing that the images won the argument, knew that her job was to win the person. And so she talked to this woman about how she would love to help her and help her get a home and help her get support. And this woman said, "I will take you up on that." And 1 week later, she invited Kiana to an ultrasound where that baby was seen for the first time. Then she carried through with that pregnancy, with this ultrasound and that ultrasound. And then baby Ava was born. This is Kiana with baby Ava shortly after she was released from the neonatal intensive care unit, being born early. And this is a more recent photo of Ava. And I think how Kiana journeyed with that woman in crisis. It wasn't just, "This is wrong, goodbye," but "This is wrong, and how can I love you? How can I be in relationship with you?" And the final story is of a doctor who contacted me several years ago. She told me over the phone that a patient of hers was almost 20 weeks pregnant, halfway through the pregnancy. And she had gone to an ultrasound clinic and found out that she was pregnant with a female fetus and wanted an abortion. The doctor called me to see what she should do. So I provided her information for how she could reach that patient, and I also connected her to a Mandarin-speaking physician in the city in which she lived. The doctor reviewed all that I had shared, met with the physician, and as a person of faith began to pray. And the night before she had a follow-up appointment scheduled with that woman, she really sensed God say to her, "Let this woman know how much I love her." So the next day the doctor went to do a follow-up appointment and started talking with this woman and decided to start her approach by seeking to understand why the woman wanted to abort a baby because she was a girl. And the woman then revealed something to her doctor she'd never told before, which was that she was raised in a home in which she was taught her life was meaningless because she was a girl. She was routinely abused by being locked in a tiny cupboard and deprived of a tiny closet rather, and deprived of food, water, and the toilet. And then when it got really cold, her family would open that locked closet and then open the front door and force her to stand outside, all because she was a girl. And when the doctor learned all of this, she thought, this woman doesn't want to kill a girl. This woman wants to spare a girl the kind of suffering she's lived through. Now, she's wrong that she's going to repeat the cycle. She's wrong that abortion is a solution, but in her traumatized state, that's where her mind went. And so the doctor lovingly listened and provided information and offered support. And that patient said she felt her doctor was the first person she'd ever encountered who truly and authentically cared about her. Several months later, at Easter time, a baby girl was born. whether it's that physician, whether it's Kiana, I hope all of us can remember their stories and follow their example of having strong minds, but also tender hearts, so that we not only win the argument, but we win the person and become defenders who truly save lives. God bless you.